Thank you for that introduction. Thanks very much to the organisers of this meeting, and especially Jenny Goldie, who didn't fall over when I suggested this working title, A Campaign of Hope and a New World Order. And also I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, and that I'm a member of a population who has displaced them. And that theme is relevant to part of my talk. Now, I'm not a theologian, despite being advertised as such by some people, but I probably am going to give a couple of sermons, but I hope you'll bear with me. Now, if I can get it to work, to go forward. Okay, I think I've gone forward one too many. So, a little bit of a review, not too much, but, you know, population bomb. Ehrlich, 68, he took that title from someone before with permission. Consumption bomb, I published a paper on that about 11 years ago. Tony McMichael didn't like the name, but I think it still might have a future, and that's the sort of theme of this talk. Where do I have to point this? Did I go too far? Okay, so resource scarcity, we've heard quite a bit about that. And groupism, well, we've also heard quite a bit about that too. You've got the Seventh-day Adventists and the Catholics, you've got the Catholics and the Anglicans, you've got the Muslims and the Hindus in India, you've got the different football teams, we've got this and that ideology, we've got economists, environmental economists and ecological economists and so on. And what they've all got in common is that they're a member of a group, and each group thinks that they've got the truth. And we've got conflict, you know, past, present and future conflict, and maybe a new dark age. Now, this cartoon is adapted from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Well, the only thing that's adapted actually is the name. I was a member of the Scenarios group. The Millennium Assessment, for those who don't know, was a collaboration of about 1,200 scientists that looked at the state of ecosystems in the world, and some of us looked at future ecosystems and how this would impact on human well-being. And as a group, we thought that Fortress World was a very ugly but plausible description of the present and the near future. But the name in the end got changed to Order from Strength, which I thought was a bit Orwellian. Now, that idea of a sort of Fortress World resurfaced in the Geo4 report published last year by the United Nations Environment Programme. And interestingly, in this cartoon, you'll see that the drawer has added a fuse to that. And of course, I think we all will understand that we are in the top half, or the top third of that world, living comparatively comfortable lives and looking increasingly apprehensively, as for example was described in The Guardian the other day about refugees, you know, coming through the barbed wire or over the moat, coming into Australia, coming into Europe and so on. So I think that's a theme which we'll also come back to. And this is another example, part of my sermon on inequality. This is cartoonist Steve Bell from The Guardian, written or published about the time of the last great summit on population before it officially got abolished as a global problem in 1994 in Cairo. So if anyone was short-sighted, it's, hey, you up at the front, stop breeding. Bell makes the point of hypocrisy, inequality, but also that we're in the same boat, and we're all very vulnerable. Now, for those of you with grey hair, you might, I don't know if these maps are still on the walls of schools, but they were when I was young, and this, of course, is a Mercator projection, and it greatly distorts the landmass, and it makes Europe look really big. And it also, you might think that the equator should be in the middle, but of course it isn't. So the equator on this map is actually towards the south. So things like this unconsciously condition us. No one when I was young taught me to ignore Africa, but a map like this that makes Africa look, you know, about the size of Europe does that unconsciously. Now that's the Peters projection, and it'd be good as a small example of value change to see that on maps in schools. And the other point about this picture, which shows land by, you know, proportional to the actual area, is that, I mean, the whole idea of Europe as a continent is ridiculous. It's just a part of a small part of a large landmass. Now, the next part of this, I'll call it the cornucopian enchantment. And I have to thank Dr. Irene for sending me the next slide. This is from, I think it's Greek mythology, Amalthea feeding the infant Zeus from the horn of plenty. And the cornucopian enchantment is the idea that I think seduced many academic and popular movements around from about roughly 1980, from the sort of rise of neoliberalism or resurgence of sort of unbridled capitalism and Ronald Reagan. Reagan became the first of a long series of US presidents who was not Malthusian. And this definitely contaminated through funding and sort of groupthink contaminated academia, including the demography and development literature. And if you see this quote, McNichol and Nag in leading Population Development Review, leading journal, from a high point 10 or 15 years ago, in other words, the time of Ehrlich's population bomb just before the Stockholm summit, intellectual concern about population has steadily waned. It's now somewhere between ocean mining and acid rain in 1982. Now, some of you will have heard of infamous in some quarters Larry Summers. He was a very senior economist at the World Bank, and then he moved on to the US Treasury and disgraced himself at Harvard University and so on. Now, in 1991, he was interviewed and he said, "There are no limits to the carrying capacity of the Earth, likely to bind any time in the foreseeable future. There's no risk of apocalypse due to global warming or anything else. And the idea that we should put limits on growth because of some natural limit is a profound error. And if we're ever to prove influential, would have staggering social costs." So I would argue that Summers and the other authors here have been infected by the cornucopian enchantment, or by the wand, touched by that wand, and we need to wake up. This idea was still around. You can still find it in the literature as late as 2000. Another eminent economist, D. Gale Johnson, American Economic Review, argued that Malthusianism was extinct, and he said, what made it possible to escape this? The creation of knowledge. And like a lot of propaganda, there's a little bit of truth in that, but of course we still need to breathe, eat, drink, and so on. And even though our knowledge can greatly amplify what the earth can provide, there certainly are limits. And the cornucopian enchantment is this absolute delusion that we can do that. Now, there's a sort of bit of light relief. So those at the back can't read. This is just before the last election. So there's Boffin in the white coat. There's an important message in this global warming report, and there's a little man on the table. It says that the Earth will warm only 0.03 degrees by the next election. So this introduces a bit of the sermon on inequality and climate change. And I know this looks a bit forbidding, but it's not really that complicated. Four bars there, published last year in a very prestigious journal. If you look at the one which is on my right, I suppose, I'm not sure which one, is that on the left for you? Or the right? But maybe if I point to it. Yeah, this one over here. This is in 2004, and each of those colours represents different parts of the world as a proportion of the global population. So you see that deep blue line, deep blue bar is China. So you see that China is roughly, a fifth of the global population in 2004. And you see the little red line at the bottom, that's the USA. Now if you go one bar over, the third one, now these bars represent, well, the right-hand one there represents population. The others represent carbon dioxide change. Now, that third one across is growth. Now, you'll see that most of that bar is blue. So most of the growth in carbon dioxide emission was occurring in China, and this was a big cause for concern, including by John Howard and so on. And you see that there's not so much growth in America. Red, it's small. And then you look at the next one across, second from the left, flux. That was the percentage. There's not the growth anymore. This is the percentage of emissions that year from these different blocks of countries. So you see that China and America are roughly equal. And of course, this was highlighted time and time again as a reason for we're not going to think about the Kyoto Protocol until China does something about it. And this plays very well to domestic audiences in Australia because, for a start, they forget about the per capita thing. So if you looked at it per capita, China would arguably have a right to emit much more than America. But